and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be working on my 1964 Volkswagen transporter or bus. What we're going to be doing is I had to get a new transmission because the transmission blew out in it. So I had no gears. But while I was there, I figured I might as well rebuild the reduction boxes too. So this video is going to be mainly showing rebuilding of the reduction boxes. So I probably missed some things and maybe they're not said right here and there and everywhere, but this should give you a general overview of how to replace or rebuild your reduction boxes. So what I did is I ordered the kit from Pittsburgh West, and they have a kit, and I'll put a picture of it right here. And it's a pricey kit. From whenever I bought it, it was $250 for one reduction boxes. So we have two reduction boxes, so you're looking about $500 in parts to rebuild them yourself. So this kit was the only one that I found that had everything in it. The three bearings, the three big bearings, and the one roller bearing in it is really expensive if you wanted to buy it without it being in a kit. So I ended up priced out all the points and parts, and I ended up just buying the kit because it was a better deal or whatever at Pittsburgh West. By the way, not sponsored whatsoever. And so the kit is really comprehensive. It has all the pieces and parts, seals that you need. So it's really good to use to start off on this project. So let's get into the video. Thank you for watching, subscribing, and liking, and all your positive comments. And remember, if you have any questions on how I did it, reduction boxes on my bus, or the transmission itself, just drop me an email or a comment and I'll try to answer it as best that I can. So thank you very much. Enjoy the video and I'll see you at the end.
One of the first things you need to do is take the drum off to get to the brakes, and you remove the brake shoes. And what I normally do is I just take the retainer springs and then take the springs off, but you can actually take the brake assembly or brake shoes off altogether in one shot. So I'm taking off the spring here. These are always a bugger because they're always tight on there and you can't get a good grip. So now you can pull them apart at the top and take them off as a whole assembly, and then on the bottom. Then you can disconnect the emergency brake, and you actually don't have to remove it from the handbrake in the front because it actually loosens up enough. But make sure your handbrake is off when you do this. So you pop that off, put that to the side, and then you can slide out your emergency brake cable. And that just kind of is a slide fit into there. The next part you're taking off is the wheel cylinder, and it's just one nut, one bolt to take that out. And you also have to remove the metal brake line in the background behind it. I'm not showing that, but this is just the wheel cylinder coming off. And it was just, real easy to get off. So the next thing is your bearing cap, or your cover for your bearing that holds your first bearing that goes onto the axle. And it's just 4 bolts. Take them off, and then you take a little pry bar and just kind of like pop the cap off, because I usually glue mine on with something. But I still use the seals, but I glue them on. But that's the cap there. That's taken off. Then the next thing is the top adjuster mount. It's a part of it actually helps hold the brake backing plate in place, and it also goes into the reduction box. So we'll take that off together, and I think this should be, it's the last part. Ta-da! There's your backing plate all taken off. And then here is our reduction box. Da-da-doo-da-doo. The next step is to start taking off the bolts that are actually around on the reduction box cover. This is the main cover that goes around. I think there might be like 8 to probably about 10 bolts going around. I think they're all 13 millimeters. So you just kind of gotta take each of them off. And I just kind of go on rotating around, make sure they're all going to come off the housing, and it looks like we're good. The next part is kind of a specialty tool that I've been using in the past to take these covers off. They're actually on there with two dowel pins, and they're kind of a pain in the butt to get apart once they have a little bit of glue on them and age. So what I'm doing is I have an engine hoist part here, and I'm putting those on, just the chains and the brackets, using some M8 bolts, and or is it M10s? I'm not sure. But then I have a little puller that we made out of a plate, and I think it's a 1/2 inch bolt in the middle. So what I do is I take this and I kind of hook it on the chain onto the puller. And you could probably make something or use just a regular puller or whatever you can find. So what I do is I'll line it all up and I'll snug it up. And then what I do is I'll start putting a little bit of pressure on it, and I'll kind of tap the housing with a sledgehammer or a rubber mallet if you want to, and it just kind of breaks it up and loosens it up. It makes it a little bit easier to get the cover off. So then once we get the cover off, then we can start getting to the bearings and things like that. You can see I'm pointing here. It helps get the pressure off of there to pull the cover off. All right, so now we're going to continue putting some more pressure on it. And since I've had these covers off before in the past to replace that seal, this one actually is coming off pretty easy, but whenever I did it the first time, it was not very easy. And you can see it's pulling away from the housing, and I think we should be able to, it should come out pretty easy. But again, it's just the puller is not to crank real hard, and it's not to be the only thing used to get the cover off. So you should kind of pry it just a little bit, and then it should come off. There you go. And there we have the cover that's taken off. It's a pretty heavy cast iron piece. It's pretty neat looking. So here's our reduction boxes, and here's our gears. So the first thing we need to do is we have a clip at the top with a retaining ring, and we use some ring pliers to get the ring taken off the bearing. And this is just the bearing retainer right there. All right, we got that taken off. So then we get a new one in the kit, I think. So the next thing to do is to get this bearing off of the housing. And what it does, it actually has a little lip. After wear and tear, the bearing gets on there, it gets kind of stuck on there. So what I'm doing here is just kind of taking two pry bars behind it and just kind of slowly working the way around it, and just kind of to get it pull the bearing away to get clear that worn lip that's on there. It's just a small amount. It's not really a whole lot. It's just enough to make the bearing difficult to get off the axle. But other than that, it wasn't too bad to get it off there. So now we got the first bearing off the axle. And spin it, check in, look at it, and just kind of put that to the side. We're not going to reuse it because our new kit has everything in it. But you can see here's the little sliver. It kind of pulled off with the bearing. So it's still okay, the axle. So now here's the top gear, and that just kind of slides right off. It's really easy to take off. There's nothing special about that besides it's the top one. The next thing is that we're going to be working on getting that bottom drive axle out. And this is where it gets a little bit complicated because you have to go around the back of the reduction boxes. And thumbs up because we're getting further along, and we'll go around the back and start working on the back side. And this is to take off your spring plate bolts. You just loosen these up, and there's 4 of those. And you also have to remove the shock too. So, but we'll get that next. So now you can see the axle starts moving. You can kind of move it around a little bit. Let's work on getting these bolts out. Check the threads, make sure they're okay. I always like to check the bolts coming out of the reduction boxes because they're actually threaded into the reduction box. So I just like to check to make sure they're okay. And there's our shock. It's now removed. So that's good. And put it together so you don't lose it. It's always a good idea because I always lose bolts. So now you'll be able to slide the reduction box over to the side. So this is what we're going to be working on here. And see that plate cover right here? That plate cover we have to remove. We're going to take a little brake clean and clean up this surface. Get all the gook and the nasty and the dirt. Like, you imagine this has been sitting here for many years collecting dirt inside this cover. But you can see it has like a lip around the edge. And there really isn't any easy way to get this cap out. I've seen guys try to use screws into it, try to pry it off, trying to cut it off, and all this different ways. But I'm pretty sure that the Bentley manual states you should weld on a bolt onto it. And that's what we're going to be doing. So I cleaned out the crack around the edges, and here me taking a flapper disc and kind of getting down the shiny metal. So what we're going to do is just take a bolt and weld it. We'll try to weld it into the middle because we want it to be into the middle as much as possible, just to make it easier to pull the cover off, because we're going to be putting some pressure on there, and I want it to come out as easy as possible. So let's throw some welds around the bolts. The bolt here, I think this might be like a 3/8 bolt. I think maybe about 2 inches long, 3 inches long maybe. It's just a bolt that I had laying around. I didn't really measure it or anything. And also there's a new cover that comes in the kit, so you don't have to worry about saving this cover or anything, because we'll be putting on a new one. And so we got that welded on there, and oh, well, what the heck, let's put another weld on there, because hey, it doesn't hurt, does it? So let's see. If you can wiggle it and you can check it with your hand, I think it should be just fine. So now the next thing is I have this piece of angle iron that I use it for a puller all the time for different things. So this is just, I'm going to use this, put that onto there, and put probably a nut and a washer on there, just like that. And then what I did is I balanced 2 bolts off the reduction box housing. You can see I'm kind of doing a balancing act here, and it's really just so we can pull that out. So it doesn't really need to be a fancy puller. It doesn't need to be anything crazy or anything. This is the simplest way that I could figure it out to get that cover off. So you can see I have these 2 bolts just kind of sitting there loose. Everything's loose and snugged down right now by hand. And then we're going to turn it with a wrench, and hopefully this cover comes off. Go. I think might be moving, so that's good. We're on our way. Okay, you can see me that I'm pointing to like the cover is coming out. So we're making our way. We're almost done here, getting that piece off. So here's when we're getting to the end of it. So I tried to pull it off by hand, but of course that doesn't work. So what's the best thing? Just grab a big old hammer. Just start smacking it. You don't have to worry about it then. Hey, we got it. There we go. Thumbs up. We got the cover taken off, and you can see here it's just like a cupped plate. It's not very thick metal, but it's just a cover to get so we can get to that nut that's on the back of that bearing. There, now you can see it a little better. You see, it's just a cap that goes over top of it. Pretty simple. You can see the weld went the whole way through, so that's pretty good. So the next thing is we have this little locking plate that's inside there. It locks the bearing in place after it's torqued. So we're going to tap that down and bend that straight so we can get a wrench on there and get the bearing out. Well, actually, no, to get the nut loose. So once we get this flat, the next step would be to see, we got to hold the axle in line, or hold it so it doesn't spin. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the drum and put the drum on the other side just to hold it, and then put some lug nuts in, lug bolts, and then put a pipe on it. Hey everybody, how's it going? And so we'll put a pipe on there to hold it in place so it doesn't spin, and then we'll come around to the inside and put a socket on there. I think it's a pretty large one, but I can't remember the size, but I'm sure it's in the Bentley manual. So you get here and break it loose. The torque wasn't too high on it, so it wasn't too crazy hard or difficult to get the nut loose there. There we go. There, it's loose. And you can see it didn't take much torque to turn it. So let's spin it out. Alright, so we're removing the nut, and I was mistaken. It's actually not a flat plate. It's actually part of the nut itself, like that you're pounding down to lock it down. So don't worry about that. There's a new one of those that come in the kit. So a lot of these parts are in the kit, so you don't have to worry about it. So let's take the drum off, give it an old thumbs up that we're still moving forward in a positive manner. So let's take a socket and a little sledgehammer and we'll tap it out. It's not really held in very tight, the bearing itself. We're just kind of tapping it out so we can get it out of the reduction box housing. And I'm just kind of tapping it a little bit at a time because I really don't want it to pop out and land on the floor. So I'm just kind of tapping it a little bit at a time so then we can catch it. There we go. We're popping it. We're popping the axle out of the bearing itself, actually. So here we got it out. Here it is, the bottom, and it was resting on there, as that's where you're actually tapping, not the bearing itself, but just the inside of it. And you don't want to hit it too hard because remember that nut goes on the end of it. So the next thing to do is we're back on the other side, the outside of the vehicle, and we have a little retainer clip to take out to get this back bearing out, the bottom bearing. So you take that. And also there's a new one of those in the kit as well. So the kit's very good that I used. So it looks like we probably need to tap that a little bit to get it to pop out of the race there, but I don't think it's actually pressed in. It's just kind of sitting in there from over age and sitting there. You imagine these have been in there for 50 years, 60 years, and here it is. Just kind of tapped it out from the back. And again, new bearing will be in the kit. So the next one is kind of a tricky one. It's the top one. We got a specialty tool that I borrowed from a friend of mine to pull a bearing out. But you can see here that I'm heating it up a little bit just to warm it up. So I make sure it's not stuck in the housing or anything. So the tool is especially designed to pull a 3606 bearing out. And Volkswagen and other manufacturers made special tools in the past, which are kind of hard to find. But there are people that make modern tools to pull these bearings out, and this is the one that I borrowed from a friend of mine. And but it actually came out relatively easy because I've had other Volkswagens where this was a real pain in the butt to try to get this bearing out on other axles and things like that. So this one surprisingly came out pretty smooth, so I'm pretty happy. But you could find these tools online or anything like that. So once you get it all lined up, which is kind of tricky as well, but once you have it lined up, it actually slid right out pretty easy. So I was pretty happy with the tool. So let's put a wrench on there and see if the bearing comes out. All right, so we have the bearings almost out, and you can see the tool, see how it kind of grips and holds that bearing all around the outside race. Seems to work pretty good. I was pretty surprised. So that's good. So that's the last bearing we had to get out of the housing. So actually the housing is now empty. So you give it an old thumbs up, and this is going really smooth, so I'm pretty happy. So the axle stays inside because it's a swing axle. Now that we've taken apart both sides, we broke them both down, and now it's time to pull the transmission, which there are millions of videos to show you how to remove a Volkswagen transmission and engine, which of course I already removed the engine. But so now I'm removing the transmission with the housing is still on, with the axle housings, and the axle inside is still on. It goes attached to the transmission. So as I'm struggling and trying to get this transmission out, let's see what we're going to do next. Okay, so now we're going to just put the transmission and axles up on a block of wood, just so it's a little easier to get to the nuts to take the axles off. The axle housings that are part of the reduction boxes. So first thing you got to do is take the boot off and loosen up there's usually 2 clamps that hold them on, and I bought new replacement ones for these, so I'm not really too concerned about them. I'll probably just end up cutting them off and putting new ones on. So then the next step would be to remove your side cover bolts. They're actually nuts. There's 6 of those. And then this should, once you have all these loose and taken off, you can take the cover piece off, that cover plate. There's that, and then there should be a plastic shim behind it. Nothing really actually holds that. Whoop! Make sure you hit the camera, hit your phone with the axle when you remove it. But all there is a plastic shim in there that keeps it smooth, and the retaining cover is what keeps that axle housing in place. And and it rides on the plastic shim. You can take that off next. Then the next thing will be a retaining ring inside of the axle. And you can see there's your swing axle, and you can see how it swings around. That's why they call the Volkswagen swing axles like that on the early ones in the 60s, and not like a later one that may have CV joints on it called IRS. So here we're taking out the clip, which isn't very easy to get to because it's kind of inside. But once you click it, then you can take that, and then you should be able to pull the axle out. There you go. Then there's a ring, a spacer ring. It goes on there. So there's our actual axle that comes out. And it has these little flat parts on the end, and it has 2 dishes. I think they're called fulcrum plates that it rides on. You have to take those out. I took those out, and with the replacement transmission, which was a used one, I kind of picked out the best looking ones because they kind of get worn out. You'll see on the surfaces of them, they're kind of like, from pushing and driving, they kind of get smacked on one side more than the other. And you'll see whatever ones are the smoothest and have less nicks on it or worn. New bearings installed, the bottom one and the top one of your axle tube. They're both 6306 bearings. They're both the exact same bearing. One you have to tap it in, and the other one kind of slides in, and it has a retainer ring right here holding it. I didn't record this part, but this is the bearing, or the roller bearing, that is on the end of the stub axle that goes into the drum. And this part actually needs to be pressed off, or I used a press to clamp onto the inside of where I'm pointing there, that little crevice, and kind of pulled the bearing off. It wasn't on there with a lot of pressure, but the press made it a lot easier. So what you have to do is then take the inside of the new bearing that's in the kit, and you press it back into the space. And it's actually a roller bearing, not a ball bearing. So the outer housing race will go inside of your housing in your reduction box. And again, that one does not need to be pressed out or pressed in. It can just be tapped out with a hammer and tapped back in. And since it's a roller bearing, when you put the cover back on, and it'll just kind of slide right over top of it, and there's nothing special that needs to be done. So I didn't record that, but I wanted to make sure that that's in the video.
Here's the setup I have to put the rear nut on for your drive axle here. So what I got is the old drum on with a pipe holding on with the lug nuts. Then I put the gear into the inside, over into the housing, into the rear bearing here. So then that's the nut we're gonna have to tighten up right there. And it's 108 foot-pounds according to the Bentley manual. So I got my torque wrench here, and then I'm gonna torque that down with this propped up on the board. I made sure this wasn't touching the ground over here so it doesn't get bent or messed up or anything. So that's what I'm gonna do now. So I took a chisel and I tapped the nut over to lock it down with the little lock tab, and here's the cover we're going to be putting on. The one we welded a bolt to and pulled it out. Now we have to put the new one in. I'm going to put some RTV all around the edges of it and kind of smear it around, because we don't want any leaks coming out of here, because this actually holds your reduction box gear oil in place. So behind it, so you don't want this to leak or anything like that in the future, because if not, you'll be taking this cover off and replacing it again in the future. So I put a little goop around there and kind of tapped it to center it up before I get a piece of wood, and I think I'm going to actually, then I tap it flat. And of course the axle retaining ring is in the way when you're trying to hit something. So I'm going to give this a few hits, and it went in relatively easy. It wasn't too hard to do. So far the whole process is really not too hard, this whole reduction box rebuild. But so if you have any questions or anything about it, let me know in the comments or send me an email in the description. Alright, so we have our cover. We could check to see if it's flat. All you do is you just tap it in so it's level with the reduction box housing. It doesn't have to be inset or anything special. So now I'm just smearing the RTV around so we get a nice sealant all around the edge. Okay, so the next thing, we're going to start putting the axles back into the transmission. So you can see I'm pointing at here, this is the differential gear on that goes in the side. It kind of slides out when you can pull the axle out. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to put some oil in there, and I'm going to clean up the fulcrum. So I already cleaned all the parts up, but I'm just putting some clean oil on there just so they don't go in dry or anything. So what you do is you take each fulcrum plate and you put it to the side just like that. You kind of hold it, if you can hold it with your thumb, and you put the round parts into the differential piece. Then your axle goes in between those fulcrum plates. It kind of like, you kind of squeeze it and wiggle it, and it'll kind of rest into place, those fulcrum plates. It's kind of tricky to get it in there, but once you get it, you can kind of wiggle it around and it'll go into place, and it kind of holds itself in there. There you go. I think I might have got it. Did I? No. The suspense, it's so suspenseful. But I'm taking this to go, there you go. I had to tap the little fulcrums so they get into place. There's a little window on the side you can use to help get it adjusted so you can get it onto your axle. So then you take this, there's nothing really special, or it doesn't have to go in a special direction, just the gears need to be put into there. Again, just putting some oil on there just so it doesn't, so it just has a little bit on there. So then you just kind of slide it in there. You can see it locks. It kind of locks into the housing there. Then you put your spacer shim on there. And then you'll put your retaining clip back on.
your would be considered an E-clip, I guess. You get that in there, and it just kind of all pushes all in there. There is no adjustments or anything like that. And that's the one thing about this reduction box rebuild, is that there actually is no adjustment or shims in things. You just kind of take everything apart and you use the parts from the kit and you put all the bearings back in and everything. So it's actually relatively easy to do. It's time consuming. Here's our clip. We're going to put the clip in there. And hopefully this will go in smooth, but we'll see. But there is no shims and there's no adjustment really for the reduction boxes or putting these axles on, except for the side covers for the axle housing, and just so it can move up and down and side to side freely. So let's finish up getting this retainer in, and let's see what we're going to do next. Alright, so we're just going to throw the other axle on the other side in, and again, adjust those little fulcrum plates through the little window, and it should pop right on there, kind of slide down in, and then put a little bit of oil on there, and we should be ready to roll. So then the next thing we'll be doing is let's install the axle housing. Alright, so here we're on the other side, and all the parts have been cleaned already, but here's our spacer, our plastic spacer, and that's just kind of a guide to help the axle swing smoothly. Then the next thing is our gaskets. So there's a variety of gaskets that are in your transmission kit if you have a transmission kit, but you can order a new gaskets for the side, and they come in a variety of different thicknesses. So generally there's 3 of them, and you just kind of get your best set of the 3. So I've already done this before. So what I did is I fit it on there, and you tighten down that cover plate with the gaskets behind it, and you make sure the axle can spin and move freely. And you just kind of adjust your shims, but generally it's just 3 gaskets and they should work, but just double check to make sure it's smooth and doesn't bind up. But you can see the cup on the end is now going to go onto the plastic spacer, and then the cover holds against the metal cup, and that's why, no, I mean the cover, and that's why you need to have a certain amount of gaskets underneath there so it doesn't squeeze too tight onto the plastic cover. So it's kind of like a trial and error type thing, but just as long as it doesn't bind, you should be good. So I'm just kind of checking everything, making sure everything's aligning up, and everything is. It's going back together as it should. So there's no real concerns, and you can see how it just kind of slides through the tube. So then let's put our cover on, and you should put a little bit of goop on there. I think I did end up putting some goop on there before I tightened down all the bolts and nuts, well, the 6 nuts that are on the end of it. Alright, so we have our cover on, it's all gooped up and done, and then I'm just going to re-tap that end bearing in that we already installed, but I just want to, it didn't move much, but I just want to make sure it's seated in there the whole way, and it actually pushes against the axle and into kind of seats and holds the axle in place. Put the transmission back in, and the rest of it is kind of just the same as we did at the beginning of the video. It's just the reverse of it. So I'm not really going to go over that totally, but let's do a little outro and get this bus out of the garage.
Alright, so that was the end of it. That's I didn't show the last bit of putting it all back together because it's just literally the reverse of what I did before. There's no shims, nothing special to put on the cover. I put sealant on things, put the bearing cover cap on, put the brake assembly back together, axle nuts, engine back in, and got it rolling and got everything back on and everything torqued to spec. So far, it's from the time I released this video, I already put 3,000 miles on the bus, and it's been working great. So it's been super smooth. So the kit has actually worked really good, and the transmission's been working pretty good. So let's get this guy out of the garage. So thank you very much. Liking and subscribing and following along. You guys are awesome. Stay awesome. And I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.